Hello and welcome back to my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. Rarity and acceptance. Nobody knew how it started, nobody knew where it came from, but everyone had accepted the society that had been built around the marks that formed once a child reached their 10th birthday. The mark on a child's arm was associated with a Pokemon. It could have been any one of the 800 or so critters that occupied the world, but the rarer the mark, the more people looked up to that child. Children gifted with pseudo-legendary marks were seen as the prodigies of their respective training choices, put on a pedestal for others to bow down to. Those with weak, first-stage or baby Pokemon were sneered at and looked down on like trash that had escaped the garbage can with the wind. Marks had become the judging factor on a child's success in the future. They had become a symbol of strength and power when they were never meant to be. No one truly knew the meanings behind the different marks and, as such, deemed them as signs of potential, not what the marks were truly made for. In mythology, marks were used as a way of finding a chosen Pokemon to be a partner with, a Pokemon that would be by your side for eternity until the end of time. That, at the very least, was the case for legendary Pokemon. Legendary marks were rare, and there was only one mark per legendary as there could only be one chosen at any one time. Whilst the other marks of non-legendaries did nothing to the person's abilities, people with legendary marks had select powers of those legendary Pokemon. Say if someone had the mark of Darkrai, they would be able to cause nightmares if people slept around them, be able to use its signature move called Dark Void, be able to use Dark-type moves and, finally, move by using shadows. And that is just looking at the surface. Legendary marks were powerful, but the people with them weren't treated like their pseudo-legendary counterparts. Oh no, they were treated as freaks. Even though people with legendary marks were chosen by those legendaries to represent them, others deemed them as threats to society. Many legendary mark owners were chased, captured, and either killed or turned into lab rats to find out how they gained their powers. It was these actions that caused those close to mythology to believe this was why Arceus, the creator, had never chosen a person to bear its mark. There was no one pure enough, kind enough or able to have adversity to be its chosen, no one was a representative of the past of humanity. There were some who predicted the coming of Arceus chosen, but almost all of them were proven wrong multiple times. If such a person existed, then why weren't they around? Of course, humanity wasn't perfect, but the systems surrounding marks had changed everything for children under and over the age of 10. Children were terrified of their mark's arrival, praying for a good mark, whilst those who had them would have their future pretty much decided for them. It was a flawed system with no room for change, a system that people were sure Arceus chosen would never live in. Oh, how wrong they were. Arceus had chosen a person to bear its mark, a 10-year-old who was about to get their very first Pokemon soon enough. A person who would change everything, for the better. Honestly, he had no idea why he offered to stay behind when he found out that there were too many trainers this year, but, for the love of his mother, Ash really was glad that he did. Having branched himself high up into nearby tree, he secretly watched the starter selection as the three other beginners chose between Bulbasaur, Charmander and Squirtle. Having only 4, in the grand scheme of things and the knowledge that hundreds of children were born on the same day in Kanto alone, be chosen to receive a starter from Professor Oak seemed daunting. Most kids received starters from their parents or grandparents as a gift for turning 10, the day their mark was revealed for the world to see. Every child hid their arm, the space nearest their wrist, to allow the mark to form and develop for its arrival when they were 10. Only on their 10th birthday could a child remove that bandage or slip on cover to reveal what the fate of the world had in store for them, find out whether that fate was good or bad. The just-turned 10-year-old yawned, swinging his legs to and fro from his seat as he thought about which of the Kanto starters he would have chosen. Bulbasaur was a good all-rounder, sturdy and tanky with good special attack, and the additional poison type made it stronger against its many weaknesses. In Kanto, Bulbasaur could be used to decimate the first 4 gyms, and then take down the 8, which was rumored to be a ground-type gym. In fact, people could consider it superior since its Mega Evolution had the ability Thick Fat, which meant it was resistant to fire and ice attacks, 2 types that were commonly used worldwide. With a mixture of special and status moves, it could be considered a beast if trained well. Squirtle, type-wise, was the best. Being a water type, it could learn ice-type moves, taking out its grass-type weakness, meaning that only electric types were a problem. Like Bulbasaur, Squirtle was useful for many Kanto gyms, with the rock, fire and ground gyms being the prominent ones, grass if you could teach it an ice-type move by the time you reached Celadon. Just like Bulbasaur, Squirtle was slightly tanky but had higher attacking stats, which made it trouble to go up against unless a powerful electric type, or a different type who knew both electric and grass type moved, took it on. Charmander was the starter that was the hardest to train. Charmeleon were known to disobey trainers if they didn't trust them or trust their skills in battling. It took a lot to gain back that trust. For those without that problem, Charmander's line was a powerhouse hidden inside a lizard draconic form. Sure, the gyms didn't really work out in Charmander's favor, but there could always be other Pokemon to catch. Being able to take to the skies and rain fiery death upon your enemies was way too cool for some kids, which is why they ended up picking Charmander. Of course, Ash knew he wouldn't get one of these three. Professor Oak was known to keep spare Pokemon, either unwanted eggs or legitimate starters that weren't the main three, such as Pikachu and Eevee. However, only those close to him knew that, or those who had been the fourth or fifth trainer to come at one time. Considering he basically lived in the Oak Laboratory and worked there thanks to his mother's job, he had seen many a Pokemon choosing in his life. Thinking about it, there would probably be an Eevee left over or something along those lines. Maybe Oak had a few elemental starters left over as well. As the 10-year-old thought over his choices, his fingers absent-mindedly scratched at the bandages covering his lower arms. With his starter came the unveiling of the mark that had been forming since his birth, a mark that no human had seen before. Sure, Pokemon like Chansey were brought in to change the coverings as not to ruin the surprise, but no human had gazed eyes on it. The door to the lab opened, almost causing Ash to fall down from his perch. As he regained his balance, he noticed that two of the trainers had left holding a Charmander and a Bulbasaur respectively, talking animatedly about their experience. The boy was surprised to find that Gary hadn't left the lab, but realized he was probably waiting his entrance to get his starter. Gary Oak was 5 months older than Ash was, but acted like the older brother that the younger had never had. Considering Ash had lived about half of his life in the labs, even having his own room inside the Oak estate, it wasn't that much of a shock to the professor. Even from being little, the two boys always played together, and ever since Ash's father went missing and his mother had been even busier with her job, a job that took her away from her family almost constantly with a week's holiday of sorts, Gary had taken it upon himself to act more responsible, be a role model for his younger friend. Not wanting to make the two males that were practically family in all but blood waiting, Ash climbed down the tree as swiftly but safely as he could and made a dash for inside the lab. With the excitement building up inside, he ran through the hallways until he reached the main, open-spaced area where two familiar faces awaited him. Both Oaks chuckled at the disheveled appearance of their continuous guest. Even the fridge the boy had grown out to cover his left eye was sticking to his face with sweat as he panted for air to refill his lungs. They were both used to it by now, having dealt with the other boy for a long time now. Gary rolled his eyes and stepped forwards, wrapping an arm around his younger brother's shoulders. "You didn't have to run, Ashy boy." The older of the two chuckled heartily, ruffling up the other's hair. "We weren't dying over here." "Well, maybe I wanted to run because I was excited." Ash huffed back, pulling himself out of the chokehold before straightening his already unruly spikes. "I've had to wait an extra hour for you guys to finish." "Seriously, why did you take so long?" "Individual mark revealings, duh." Gary looked down at the offending wrappings around Ash's arms and raised his right arm, revealing a tattoo-like image just below his wrist on his forearm. Two crossing silver spoons were the foreground to a trio of purple-pink wavy circles, the mark of an alakazam. "I got lucky, but not pseudo-legendary lucky." "An alakazam? No way." The younger male gushed, pulling forth the knowledge he had gained from analyzing Pokemon from their information and from TV battles. Alakazam is one of the strongest psychic types in the world with a powerful mega evolution to boot. It's known for its intelligence and planning skills. It's also able to learn to communicate to humans via telepathic waves from its huge brain, which has an IQ of over 3,000. Ash, you're mumbling again. The oak boy raised an eyebrow, noting how his friend jumped back and began rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry. I was trying to say how awesome a Pokemon it would be on your team, man. Professor Oak's gleeful laugh cut through the embarrassing tension, returning attention to the old man. I am glad someone listened to my lectures. Upon saying that, he sent a look in Gary's direction. But you've had your turn, Gary. It's Ash's turn to pick his starter. I chose Squirtle, by the way, Gary butted in, ignoring his grandfather's stare. Just giving you a slight heads up for our next battle, since you are my little bro, after all. Anyway, the professor coughed, turning to the table which the Pokeball for Charmander, Bulbasaur and Squirtle once resided on. Since there were 4 trainers here today, and I only had 3 elemental starters, that meant I needed to prepare a starter for the one who was late or chose to remain behind. After a call from Professor Birch, saying he had a spare Pokemon egg lying around, I took it and had it raised with the same expectations as a starter would have, except this one is more destructive, which is why I'm happy knowing it's going to one of you. Pressing a button on a handheld remote control raised a pedestal, with a Pokeball resting on top, right beside the table. Well then, Ash. Are you ready to meet your partner? Do you even have to ask? Ash answered, almost jumping up and down with excitement for what was to come. Reaching out, he picked up the Pokeball and, as all first-time trainers did, threw it experimentally to reveal the creature inside. In a flash of light, a small childlike figure formed in front of the 3, its white pajama-like body meeting a clashing green bob cut of hair. A mouth and the lower parts of the eyes could only just be seen on its face, whilst its long fringe was parted slightly with a flat horn-like spike poking out of its head from the front and the back. His starter was a Ralts. Ralts was the first in the Gardevoir Gallade line, a psychic and fairy type with amazing special attack or attack depending on gender and which evolution is suitable. Gardevoir had the best Mega Evolution with Pixelate, turning every normal type move into fairy, giving it a stab boost. Hyper Voice plus Pixelate equal Draco Meteor levels of power. Gallade was an impressive attacker, with Leaf Blade as one of its many moves, a powerful slashing attack which was helped by its sharp appendages attached to its arms. And I thought I was lucky, Gary whistled at the sight of the Pokemon in front of them. Ralts are pretty hard to find in the wild. How did Birch get an egg of one? One of his trainers had a. Okay. The older child placed his hands over the younger one's ears, blocking out any dirty content from the innocent brain those ear canals connected to. I get the picture, Gramps, trying not to ruin the innocent here. Oh, right. Professor Oak scratched his chin sheepishly before he regained his posture. This Ralts is a female, about level 5 by now, and has 2 unlocked egg moves in her possession. Confuse Ray and Shadow Sneak. Her ability is Trace, which allows her to copy the ability of the opposition's Pokemon, something that can turn the tide of battle. Wow, she sounds awesome. Ash stated whilst smiling at his starter, who puffed her chest out proudly, which made him laugh in the process. Yes, she loves to fight and prove her strength, which is why I said destructive earlier. The professor announced, chuckling at the small Pokemon's posing. I was hoping one of you two could train her, considering how much knowledge I've implanted into your brains with my research, so I was glad when Ash said he'd stay behind. He regained his composure once more, and an air of professionalism reigned over the aging man. Now, I believe it's time to see what mark you have, my boy. Why yeah. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the moment that would choose his place in society, whether it be good or bad. Turning his head, he frowned to see Gary heading for the exit. Where are you going? I thought you were going to stay. Nah, the mark revealing is something strictly between sponsor and trainer. I can't be here, so I'd better head to Viridian City and prepare for my first gym battle. Gary stopped in the doorway, turning his head around so his brother could see his grin. But when we next meet, you can tell me what awesome Pokemon made your mark, got it? Got it. With that, Gary waved goodbye and left the lab to set off on his own journey. Now then, the professor had waited until the front door had nearly been slammed shut before he continued. More often than not, the mark is situated on your dominant arm, but there are times when it's not, so all unveilings start with the right arm, so don't worry if it's not there. I know you're left-handed. Slowly, Oak unwrapped the right arm's bandages with Ralts watching curiously from below them. As he got to the wrist, it was shown that the right arm had nothing on it. Because of that, it meant that there was only one solution and that the mark was on the dominant arm. Of course, that wasn't the only solution in Ash's mind. What if I don't have a mark? The boy asked suddenly as the professor got to work unwrapping the other arm. That's impossible, Professor Oak promised, trying to reassure the boy he saw as a second grandson. Ever since the beginning of humanity, people have had marks. There is no way you won't have one. But, let's say what if. Let's say, wait and see. As the area close to the wrist was exposed, the mark beneath it glowed with a white light. Everything seems in check, it'll glow until I've fully released it and... Oh my! The bandage had fallen to the ground, left forgotten in the wake of the jaw-dropping revelation that was in front of him. The light had dimmed, revealing a golden circle with spikes pointing out in the near corner like places on the shape, making a crisscross in between the inner and outer circles. In the band made by the circles was split evenly into 18 with all of this background by a deep purplish-pinkish circle that faded into the natural skin color around it. It was a mark that had never been seen in human history. It was the Mark of Arceus. 000. I can't believe it, my trainer is Arceus's chosen. The chosen one. Ralts paced up and down her trainer's bed as he put the dark blue and white jacket of his trainer outfit over a black undershirt and a large white ribbon-like belt, that was tied into a bow at the side with two ends trailing down his legs, sometimes hitting against the baggy, grayish-blue trousers that were tucked into red high-top boots. She grinned with a smug look of satisfaction. Ha! I get to lord it over the other Pokémon of the world. Kneel before the mighty Ralts, starter of the Chosen One. Ash sighed as he grabbed the pair of middle-finger looped arm covers that reached halfway to his elbow, tied to his wrist by strong red thread so his mark wouldn't show. Having a legendary mark was a big deal, especially since that meant gaining 4 powers related to that legendary over the course of the next few years. Some came instantly, others took time to develop, but there was one huge thing that made having such a mark so scary. It was society and the people who deemed legendary mark owners as nothing but lab rats to find out how normal marks could give people power. It was terrifying enough to have a first-stage evolution as a mark due to how low the others would treat you, but what was more horrific was that even those at the bottom of society would actively hunt and capture legendary mark owners to probably boost their place in the pecking order. Professor Oak was also a legendary mark owner, the chosen of Shalebi. From Shalebi's powers, the professor could travel through the time that he was alive for, manipulate plants with chlorokinesis, levitate to a near state of flight and could absorb information from plants and trees outside. Of course, they were amazing gifts that could easily be hidden. However, Ash wasn't so lucky. One of his gifts had manifested straight away, the ability to understand Pokémon. Oh boy, he was not going to get away with this. Mere seconds after his mark revealed itself, he heard a female's voice begin shouting arrogantly to see what was going on and why old Monkey Face, Professor Oak, had gone pale, a voice he learnt belonged to Ralts. After getting over the shock, the professor began to speculate what other abilities his charge of sorts had obtained, guessing that Judgment, Arceus' signature move, and Plate Switch, the ability to change types, were included as they were well known for the legendary. However, the last ability was shockingly predicted as telekinesis, not something random like aura abilities which one could get from either a Mark of Dialga, Palkia, Mew, Giratina or any of the Sinnoh Lake trio, Azelf, Mespirit or Uxie. Arceus created the universe, so some kind of psychic ability had to be in there somewhere. After this, he was told immediately to cover up his mark, hiding it from sight to keep himself safe. It was commonly known that people would cover up their marks by wearing long sleeves, jackets, or some kind of elbow-reaching glove, which is exactly what the professor had given him. Sure, they weren't gloves, but they did their job and looked kinda cool, matching the more traditional look of his outfit. Putting on the items of clothing, he turned to his starter, who was still going on about her superiority over every other Pokémon in the world. Please don't say stuff like that, you could get us into trouble. Ash swung his backpack on and adjusted the straps as he talked. Police reports say that Team Rocket have a Pokémon on them that can speak in the human language but can still understand the Pokémon language. Blabbering stuff like that could end my life as we know it. Sorry. Ralts looked genuinely apologetic, staring down at the ground with her head bowed low in guilt. I'm just so excited that I sometimes don't think before I speak, Anne. She was interrupted by a reassuring pat on the head. It's okay, Ralts. Ash gave her a small, teeth barely showing, smile which calmed her nerves down. We all do it some time or another. I've run my mouth multiple times when angry, so I can get where you're coming from. His eyes rested on the framed photograph on his bedside table, the last photo taken before everything went to pot, before his father vanished and before his mother was basically made to live at her workplace. That's your family, huh? Ralts tipped her head as she viewed its captured memory from on the bed, legs swinging to and fro as she did so. I guess something bad happened, which is why you're living with old Mankey Pants out there. When a nod was her only answer, she freaked out at the thought that she'd hurt his feelings. Sorry. I shouldn't have said anything about it. It's okay, living with Professor Oak and Gary has been amazing. The 10-year-old sighed again before he picked up his starter in his arms and headed out of the room, giving it one last glance before he headed for the stairs to the first floor. So, are you ready to be the best? Please, have you forgotten who you're talking to? Ralts scoffed and flicked her hair with her stubby arms. I was born to be the best. Good to hear it, Professor. Ash ran the rest of the way to the lab's front entrance where Oak was waiting for him. I've triple-checked everything and we're ready to go. I bet you are, you've been waiting ages for this day. The old man cleared his throat before giving them a weary smile. Please stay safe, your mother would kill me if she found out your Mark had put you in even more danger than she expects from you. I'll keep it covered up, so don't worry there. Ash grinned at the mentor figure he had seen grow into the grandfather he never had. And I'll call when I get to Viridian. I have Ralts to protect me, after all. Ralts, without speaking, quickly saluted at the professor, showing him that she was not going to let anyone get near her trainer to harm him if they tried. All right, I'll look forward to that conversation. Good luck, you two. Thanks for everything, Professor. See you soon. With a quick wave and a tear-filled glance, Ash rushed down the stairs leading from the Oak Laboratory to Pallet Town, heading towards the path that would grant him access to route his Pokédex was in his trouser pocket, having been obtained in the days before the starter. Choosing to save time, extra Pokeball were in his other pocket and his starter was whooping and cheering from the top of his head as he ran, standing on top of it as if it was a surfboard. As the breeze swept his fringe from covering his left eye, both eyes caught sight of a beautiful landscape with the sun slowly rising with the morning wake-up call from the village's Dodrio. Today was truly the best day to start a journey on. Enter the trio. Living with Professor Oak for around 5 years had some curious benefits to the situation. Instead of going to the local Pallet Town Comprehensive School for budding trainers, Ash had been home taught alongside Gary since he was 4, even before the incident with his father had happened. Being homeschooled by one of the greatest minds of the century was an honor within itself, and thus had set the two boys up with all the knowledge they needed to succeed as Pokémon trainers. As well as lectures that next to no one had on a daily basis, the aging professor had added practical lessons so that real-life experience could be added to the list of skills they had acquired. The practical lessons included stuff like grooming, healthcare and nutrition. They also included mock battles with certain limitations, using type-only moves, anything goes, status moves only. Professor Oak had truly prepared his 2 grandsons for anything. Ash also remembered that trainers were limited to only 6 Pokémon each until having competed in a Pokémon League in a round at or above the top 16. The reason behind the limit was due to the fact that many Pokémon had been deposited in the PCs and left abandoned once a trainer had left them in there. Being stuck in a computer for over a year had extremely harmful mental effects on the creatures, with most of the rescued ones from the Limit's introduction having to be put through intensive therapy before they could be put up for adoption or released into the wild again. Thinking carefully, he realized he needed a diverse team, a team that was mixed in attack and defense with some speed in the mixture. With Ralts being a psychic and fairy type, she was already powerful against fighting, dark, poison and dragon types, with weaknesses against ghost, bug, steel and poison, with the fairy being weak whilst psychic was strong against the latter type. Sure, she could learn a bunch of other special moves, since Gardevoir was predominantly a special defense mix, but they wouldn't have the same impact of her stab moves. Stab moves were the moves that matched her dual typings, they always obtained some kind of percentage of a power boost when used. Route 1 wasn't the best place to catch a new team member, even with the influx of foreign Pokémon migrating to the Kanto region. The path between Pallet Town and Viridian City was often the home to baby Pokémon and their families, with the basic, weaker first stages of the Raticate and Pidgeot lines joining them. Most trainers didn't know that and scoured the route for hours in search of a rare catch, even though the best ones were swimming around in the rivers around the route. Taking that into account, and considering he did want a water type at some point, Ash decided to fish for his next Pokémon. Having assembled the fishing rod and cast out his line, all there was left to do was wait for a bite. Since there was no one around, he used space between his crossed legs to rest his fishing rod as he pulled the glove sleeve off. Sure enough, the Mark of Arceus was staring up at him, he hadn't hallucinated the past few hours. Brushing his fringe away from his left eye, Ash stared up at the sky with an indifferent expression. True, having a legendary mark, especially one that no one had ever obtained before, was amazing, but, at the same time, he was scared. Legendary mark owners were the target of attacks, kidnapped and never seen again, until their decaying corpse showed up months or even years later. It was terrifying to think what would happen if the truth behind his mark ever got out to the general public, let alone evil organizations that wouldn't think twice to capturing him for evil purposes. His mother knew all about that, her job required her to face those kinds of people on a daily basis. With a sigh, he slipped the hand sleeve back on and tightened the threads back into a bow before picking up the fishing rod again. At least, in a morbid way of thinking, it could have been worse. He could have a Magikarp for a mark. Of course, his sassy, overconfident Ralts heard his sigh and decided to practice becoming the prime example of a starter Pokémon for all of the other Pokémon out there that she would, one day, come across. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked, taking a seat beside her trainer from where she had been laying in the grass. "Oh, you know, the usual." Ash chuckled quietly, still not completely believing that he could understand her every word. "Just how I'm going to die a painful death with the mark I have." "How nice," Ralts groaned, rolling her hardly visible eyes. "Now excuse me as I throw up with that image you just gave me. I didn't go into detail, you're the one with the overactive imagination." He snarkily replied back with a smile etching itself slowly onto his face. "And now you're smiling, finally." The small fairy type grinned, glad she had managed to bring her trainer out of such a low mood. "So, since we have the time, I want to get to know you since we're gonna be kicking trainer butt together. I'll go first. I'm Ralts, you know the detailed stuff. I'm the oldest of 2 siblings, but my brother was a shiny, so he got to live a life of luxury with that Brendan creep. My dad was a Dusknoir and my mother was, as you know, a Gardevoir, so yeah. Oh, and I kinda kicked my mother's trainer where the sun don't shine when I hatched, long story." She looked up at her trainer, who just looked down at her with a blank expression. "Wow, now I see where the sass comes from." Ignoring the indignant shout of "Hey!" from beside him, Ash decided to reveal his side of the story. "Okay, I'm Ash. I'm 10 today, I'm left-handed and I just happen to be the biggest trouble magnet this side of the Tojo Falls. I'm a single child whose mother practically lives where she works and has a missing father, so stays with the best mind this century has produced and whose best friend acts like an overly protective big brother. Anything else?" Pondering for a moment, he gasped gently in realization that he had forgotten something. "Oh, and yeah, I heal really quickly from injuries for some reason. Doctors have no idea how I do it, but I just do. You name it, cut, sprain, broken bone, I'll have healed from it in half the time I was supposed to. Okay, you're just weird for a human. Ralts realized she had just said that to every Pokémon's Lord and Savoir's chosen one, she was going to be in so much trouble. Oh crap, I didn't mean to say that. It's okay, being weird is better than being normal. The two began laughing, glad any tension between them had been cleared up almost instantly. Whilst waiting for a bite, Ralts had started a game of That Cloud Looks Like. And both human and Pokémon were trying to come up with the most creative answers they could imagine. That's, Rattata being eaten alive by a Buneary. Ralts' answers had been incredibly morbid, her answers were the most gruesome ideas she could conjure up in her brain. Don't be daft, it's a Pikachu running with a citrus berry in its mouth. Oh yeah, I see it, she huffed at her trainer's muffled giggles. Laugh it up, big guy, laugh it up. I will, in my own time. As he spoke, Ash felt a tug at the end of his fishing line which turned into a tension-causing pull. Ralts, get ready. I think we've got something awesome. What makes you say that? She asked him out of curiosity. Because it's really heavy, he deadpanned back at her, rolling his eyes briskly before returning his undivided attention to the fishing rod. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Without much resistance from the thing on the end of the hook, Ash pulled the catch onto dry land. He was easily expecting some heavy water type, maybe a migrating one from another region, but he was not expecting to have fished up some trainer and his Pokémon. The boy was brown-haired, wearing a mixture of green and yellow in his trousers and jacket. Black fingerless gloves with thick yellow bands half hid his mark, but the undeniable flopping carp in a puddle told all. As the boy coughed up some of the water in his airways, Ash noticed he was holding a yellow-furred Pokémon called a Pikachu. The Pikachu in the boy's arms was covered in scratches and cuts, some shallow and others deep. Ash was so concerned for the Pokémon's health that he ignored the fact that this Pikachu had a tuft of hair atop of its head, between its large ears. Hey, is your Pokémon okay? Obviously, it was not because the poor thing was unconscious, but he kind of wanted to hear what the boy had to say for himself, especially since the boy had scratches and cuts on his person too. The boy didn't seem to hear him properly and seemingly assumed that he had been asked if he was okay. Yeah, I'm fine. He was interrupted by the stern glares from both Ash and Ralts. No, I was talking about your Pikachu. Ash shook his head with a sigh, reaching into his backpack for a super potion that he had packed the night before. You need to get the poor thing to a Pokémon Center. Here, this should stabilize it until you reach Viridian City. The nearest Pokémon Center is in Viridian, which is luckily not too far from here and... The boy had quickly doused his Pokémon in the medical spray and had already run off in the direction of Viridian City. You could just not thank me for helping you. Brat! Ralts yelled as she crossed her arms from her position standing beside her trainer. Well, that's the water type scared away for a week or two. Ash sighed heavily but smiled down at his starter. What do you say to heading to the Pokémon Center to rest for the night? A comfy bed, free food, good facilities. She began to count down the reasons for agreeing on her non-fingered hands. Everything a girl could ever want for the night. I'm game for that. Great. We'd better get going then. The 10-year-old packed up his fishing rod and picked Ralts up so she could be carried from his arms. Unbeknownst to the two, a golden glowing figure was watching them with a smile on her face. Her rainbow wings flapped up and down to keep her airborne. True, she had been forced to play her hand against those agitated flying types earlier, but seeing this was worth it. You've really chosen a good one, father. And with that, Lady Ho-Oh, the ancient phoenix of Johto, rose high up into the air and disappeared behind the clouds. 000. Oh my god, Ralts laughed loudly as she brushed the soot and carbon emissions off of her face. You really do look like Ash. Thank you, Ralts, my sides are splitting from your incredible humor. Ash began dusting himself off, having not expected to end up on the receiving end of a motorcycle's exhaust fumes. Upon entering the city, the two had found themselves under fire from a black cloud of fumes and dust, and from that Ralts had decided to make a crack at his name. Very funny indeed. Ah, I knew my talents were appreciated. She jokingly yet smugly grinned, only to recoil slightly at the stare of disbelief she was being given. Oh, come on, you would have done it if you were in my position. You are right, I would have, but we need to find the Pokemon Center. We have training tomorrow for the Pewter City Gym battle. Right. As the two passed the police hut, neither of them noticed the small hook floating down from nowhere, ripping into a part of a wanted poster before pulling it up and out of sight, almost as if the poster had never been there before. Of course, by then, they were already halfway down the road with the Pokemon Center in sight. Ash ran the rest of the way with Ralts clinging onto his shoulder. He slowed his pace down to a gentle walk when he entered the front doors, only to almost get run over by an Officer Jenny on a motorcycle. At least they knew that she was the one who had covered them earlier and not some delinquent who laughed at other people's misery. The boy from earlier was there too, staring at the lit-up sign above the door to the side of the front desk. Obviously his Pokemon was being examined over its critical condition. He looked up, noticed Ash and smiled weakly, almost as if he was inviting the other to come over. Ash, by chance, did want to speak to the boy. He wanted to know if that Pikachu was okay, after all. Hey! The boy muttered as Ash took the seat beside him. Look, thanks for giving me that super potion. Nurse Joy said it saved Sparky's life. I owe you for that. Think nothing of it, Ash answered, petting Ralts gently on her head, which she seemed to like. I just can't stand to see injured Pokemon, so I had to do something. Speaking of injured, you need to get seen to as well. He pointed at the wounds covering the other boy's arms and face. You could have infected one of them or something. I'll get myself looked at once Sparky is okay. The boy seemed determined that he would wait to find out if his Pokemon made it through examinations and recovery. I'm Richie, by the way. Ash, nice to meet you. The two shook hands as a way of introduction, allowing for a fluid conversation to follow. So, how did you and Sparky end up like that? Spearow Flock. Richie replied honestly, looking down at the ground with guilt in his eyes. I angered one of their members when Sparky wouldn't listen to me. They chased us down and I jumped in the river to save ourselves when you fished us up. Funnily enough, they didn't return to finish off the job, but boy, am I glad for that. That Spearow Flock has been causing trouble for years, Ash began to mumble as he thought about the scenario. They could just be territorial, or it's their aggressive nature towards trainers and trained Pokemon that makes them act the way they are. Arguably, so could their anger management issues and... excuse me? Pulling himself from out of his thinking time, the black-haired boy realized he had managed to terrify both Ralts and Richie in quick succession of each other. You were mumbling and it was kinda creepy, if I'm honest. Dude, how do you know all of that? Ralts asked, highly curious to her trainer's in-depth knowledge of the flying types near Pallet. Sorry. Ash apologized to them both, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly as he continued to speak. I just do that sometimes when I'm thinking about something. Don't worry about it too much. Okay. Richie turned his head to the phone booths and sighed. Professor Oak is going to kill me when I next call him. If he finds out what has happened, he'll revoke my license and... Chill. Ash tried his hardest to keep Richie from hyperventilating, being as calm and as comforting as possible. If it really bothers you about calling him, I'll be there with you when you do it tomorrow or something, so I could stand up for you if you need it, okay? Thank you. Richie's sniffling ended when the light above the door went out and the door itself opened, revealing a pink-haired woman with a Chansey by her side. The Chansey was pushing the movable Pokemon stretcher alone towards their direction. Sparky. Is he gonna be okay? He'll be fine with a day or so's rest, Nurse Joy answered him honestly before her smile disappeared from her face. Be careful next time. Even with a type advantage, Pikachu are still able to be equally damaged from Pokemon like Spearow. Just be grateful you were given a super potion by a kind stranger or it would have been worse. Yes, Nurse Joy. Just as the nurse was turning to speak to Ash, a crashing sound turned everyone's attention to the glass panel in the ceiling of the Pokémon Center. 2 Pokeball had been thrown down, releasing a coughing and an Ekans respectively. The coughing immediately created a smokescreen whilst Ekans added a poisonous hint to it. Both humans and Pokémon were covering their noses and shutting their eyes to stop the substance from getting in. During the chaos, a man, a woman and a Meowth had managed to make their way in through the skylight and were posing for some kind of drama with music blaring in the background. Prepare for trouble. The woman with curling magenta hair announced with a dramatic flair. And make it double. The man with loose but styled periwinkle-colored hair added with a rose in his mouth. To protect the world from devastation. To unite all people within our nation. To denounce the evils of truth and love. To extend our reach to the stars above. Jesse. James. Team Rocket blasts off at the speed of light. Surrender now or prepare to fight. Meowth. That's right. The Meowth's ability to actually talk shocked everyone, including a Pokémon understanding Ash who was starting to get used to listening to both languages. So, this was the rumored English-speaking Pokémon. It was kinda sorry looking for a Team Rocket member, in Ash's opinion. With the smokescreen fully cleared, the humans' white uniforms with big red R's on them were highly visible. So, they were with Team Rocket. What do you want? Richie yelled out, acting rather like a hero in one of those cliché-filled cheese fests. We're Team Rocket, what do you think, brat? The woman, Jessie, sneered back at him, shaking her head in disbelief. We're here for strong Pokémon, obviously you don't have one. That was a blow to Richie's ego, if he had one already. But all the Pokémon at this center are weak or need medical attention that only I can provide. Nurse Joy argued back with their attackers. They are of no use to you, you fiends. Wow, she's been working on that one. James, the male, clapped slowly with sarcasm dripping from his every word. That one over there isn't hurt or injured. He was pointing at Ralts, who was scowling from her position on Ash's shoulder. Yes, so you'd better just give us that one right now. Jessie added with her Ekans joining her partners coughing in defensive stances. Ralts is my Pokémon and I'm not letting her go to the likes of you, Ash snarled. Ralts, use confusion. The fairy type jumped down from his shoulder and sent waves of psychic power at the 2 poison types, who flinched and cried out in recoil to the super effective attack. Researching the Pokédex right after meeting your starter was a really good idea, since he knew that confusion was the only move that Ralts could inflict any damage on. Ralts sneakily used confusion again against Ekans on its own, sending it flying into the wall behind the rocket members, knocking it out from the force of impact. Coughing, use smog. James announced, sprigging the boy as neither villain was overreacting from the loss of one of their team members. Ralts, use shadow sneak to dodge and finish up with confusion. Ash instructed, watching as a shadowy purple aura enveloped Ralts, allowing her to melt into the floor and move like a shadow behind coughing, avoiding the plumes of toxic gas, only to jump up from her spot and send another poison type flying into the wall. This gained a reaction as Jessie and James scowled at the boy for knocking out their Pokémon. Meowth, do something. Jessie demanded, tapping her foot against the floor impatiently. Alright, keep your hair on. Meowth replied, extracting his claws before he ran like Naruto towards Ralts. With a single yawn, Ralts already had the cat Pokémon signed, sealed and delivered to its owners. She only saw that fight as a bit of extra fun. We'd better go, James muttered to his teammates suddenly. I don't want to be a complete failure today. Me neither, Jessie turned back to the audience of 2 boys and the adult Joy. You were lucky today, brats, but next time will be different, I promise that. Releasing coughing again, the trio of villains disappeared behind yet another smokescreen. What was up with all the smokescreens? They hadn't caused any real damage, but they still tried to steal from a Pokémon Center, which was an extremely heinous crime. What a bunch of weirdos. Richie muttered, staring at the spot they once occupied. Weirdos they may have been, Nurse Joy responded, shaking her head at her thoughts. But they had a plan which would have succeeded if you and your Ralts weren't here, young man. I thank you for protecting my Pokémon Center. It was nothing, honestly. Ash couldn't stop himself from nervously chuckling. All I want is a good night's sleep and I'll be out of your hair. Don't be like that, you two staying overnight is no bother to me at all, you are the only human staying tonight. The Joy went behind her desk and placed 2 key cards on the worktop surface. These are your rooms, thank you for everything. Well. Shut up, Ash, you are way too modest for your own good. Ralts was still talking by the time they had reached their room, not noticing how tired her trainer was. What she did notice, however, he had begun snoring when she was explaining her thoughts about the attempted burglary, out cold from the rest of the world. Feeling sleepy herself, she curled into his side and fell asleep with a content smile on her face. Today had been the best day of her life. It was early in the morning, the sun was slowly rising on the horizon. The light blue of the sky melded into the orange redness of dawn. Still highly visible in the sky was a nearly full moon, basking alongside a now trickling river of clouds. An early chill settled in with droplets of dew still sticking to the grass, though a lack of a breeze made it feel refreshing rather than nerving. Without any help from external forces, a multitude of leaves floated up in the air surrounded by a pinkish hue. Tell me why I'm doing this again? A very annoyed Ralts asked as she continuously used her psychic-type move on the once fallen leaves. Because to learn psychic, you need control, and to learn magical leaf, you need to be able to create psychokinetic leaves and throw them, so what better is there than practicing on the real thing? Ash took a deep breath and pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a small headache coming on. I know you don't learn psychic until you're about to evolve into a Gardevoir, but you can learn magical leaf now, and even if you can't master it by pewter, the next gym afterwards in Cerulean is a water-type one where it'll be highly effective. Plus, it'll help strengthen up confusion and give you a feel for how the leaves should feel. You really thought of everything. By now, Ralts was getting increasingly angry and thus lost control, sending the leaves flying in multiple directions, striking tree trunks and cutting through small shrubs. She froze briefly, realizing that she had let her emotions get the better of her. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Ralts, don't worry about it. You're still in training. Her trainer knelt down beside her, gently rubbing her hair. You won't get everything first time around. It's just a matter of repeating and trying again, just like anything in life. I know you can do it, it's just practice. Okay. Okay. Ralts sighed heavily, slumping her shoulders over. So, from the top. As long as you can get some leaves together, then sure, we can try again. Ash quickly glanced around at the circle of destruction left behind in Ralts' outburst. As long as you promise not to harm the plant life this time around. I don't want to anger any of the Pokémon that live around here. Alright, I promise. The small psychic type continued immediately, gathering a bunch of leaves and began floating them once more, every now and again trying to move them around in patterns to increase her control and concentration. Sometimes, Ash gave her some advice, remembering what Professor Oak had taught him about certain grass-type moves like Razor Leaf, that also applied to Magical Leaf, which turned out to be quite helpful in the end. By the time the sun had reached its peak in the sky, the basics of the move were down to AT, but it was still a huge work in process, along with strengthening up confusion. Both trainer and Pokémon settled down for lunch, with Ralts being delighted to find some oran berries mixed in with her food. The silence lingered whilst they ate, only to be disturbed by a small rustling in the overgrown grasses nearby. Ralts immediately jumped into action, eyes glowing underneath her fringe of a bowl cut whilst her trainer tensed up, preparing for the worst. The rustling continued, slowly increasing as whatever was causing the noise got closer, and closer still. Just as Ralts was about to use her psychic powers on whatever was coming towards them, the grass parted as a blue Pokémon collapsed in front of them, into the middle of the clearing they had set their lunch up in. It took a second for either of them to process what just happened, however, once they had, it was all hands on deck. Ash leapt from his seat, grabbing his backpack in the process, before he knelt next to the fallen Pokémon, Ralts doing the same. Holy Mew, are they okay? They look bad. Ralts commentated as her trainer gently pulled the Pokémon into his arms, looking over them. They were a Riolu, and in a very bad condition. Their fur was covered with scorched tips, some parts matted with a brown substance which raised their concern greatly. The Riolu looked extremely dehydrated, and felt underweight, their body littered with scars and some still unhealed wounds. They look really bad. Is there anything you can do to help them? I have some healing items, and I'm sure I've got some extra berries just in case. She could see the fear of failure in her trainer's eyes, a fear she planned to stamp out right at that very moment. Ash, listen to me. We are going to help this Riolu and they're gonna get better, no matter what. Ralts opened his backpack for him, popping her head inside to try and find what he needed to help him out. Now, tell me what I'm looking for again. I think I should have a couple of potions in there, the blue spray bottles, Ash told her, calming himself down. And some citrus berries, they're the yellow ones with the visible seeds on them. Right, hold on a sec. Moments later, she emerged holding the requested items. Ta-da! Here they are. Thanks, Ralts. Her trainer smiled at her, then began to spray the wounds with the potion whilst frowning at the unconscious Pokémon's whimpers of pain. Slowly the cuts began restitching themselves together, and the scars began to fade. Pokémon medicine was truly a marvel, able to heal the most damaging of injuries in a second. With the worst of the problems sort of dealt with, what the potion couldn't cover then the citrus berry would. The problem was getting the Riolu to eat. Here, please have a bite. He held the berry to the Riolu's snout, watching as their nose twitched twice before they weakly opened their mouth to take a chunk of it. It took a while, but soon a sizable chunk of the berry was gone, and the Pokémon was looking a lot better. And now, we wait. Ralts muttered, plopping herself down harshly next to the sleeping form of the Riolu. She already looked tired out of her mind and it had only been a couple of minutes. Ugh, I'm bored. How long is this going to take? You could always practice with the leaves again. I guess I could technically wait a while longer. Yeah, I thought so. 000. It was like wading through a murky fog when he woke up, unable to recall what had happened prior. He remembered fragments, an explosion, screaming, the terror of howls that followed him as he ran, a clearing, a trainer. Riolu shot up, eyes wide and paws ready to strike. If there was a trainer nearby then they'd just capture him and treat him the same as the poacher, until he realized he was lying on a sleeping bag with a makeshift pillow under his head. His body no longer hurt, at least not half as badly as it had when he was running, escaping. The returning pieces of his memory happily reminded him, and despite the mess of the charred ends of his fur, he seemed to be in good condition. How? Why? Welcome to the land of the living, Wolfkin. He turned his head to see a Ralt standing beside him, her arms folded in front of her torso awkwardly. We hope you enjoyed our free services at Chosen One and Company. Campsites. Please leave us a 5-star review and a helpful tip in berries when you leave, thank you. Excuse me. Riolu could have sworn that this psychic type was 5 Pokéyen short of insanity. She just grinned at him, only to stop when another voice called out from the other side of the clearing. Ralts, please stop antagonizing them. This voice sounded exasperated, potentially due to dealing with this mad female for an unknown amount of time. We've only just managed to heal them enough so they can move. I don't want a full-blown fight breaking out because you want it to be funny. But Ash, the Ralts ummed, sulking like a hatchling that was denied an extra hour of playtime. I am funny and you know it. You're as funny as one of the professor's poems. It was then Riolu realized that the Ash Ralts was referring to was not another Pokémon but a human and he began to quake in fear. The human noticed this as he slowly walked over, hands empty and up in a position of peace. It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you or capture you. You collapsed into where we set up for lunch and we've tried to heal you as best as we could. Sorry if the potions aren't good enough, but they're all I have. The human, Ash, gained a guilty expression, gaze turned down to the floor. I should really buy some better items when I get to Pewter Inn. Case Ralts ever gets badly hurt on the road. Excuse me, princess, but I ain't ever getting grievously injured. The psychic type scoffed, ignoring the sudden unamused glare she was getting from her trainer. Oh really? So, if we come across a dark type, without you knowing any fairy type moves, and we can't win, would you rather I had powerful healing items that would get you back into action minutes afterwards or wait to heal for days using the stuff I have now? Well, fine. But it's not gonna happen because I have Shadow Sneak, an egg move, remember? And I'm learning Magical Leaf. Yes, but ghost type attacks don't do much to dark types, and you should really be learning Disarming Voice around now. Riolu was watching the back and forth bantering, extremely confused. How on earth was this human understanding the Ralts, just how? It was through this mini-argument that he spoke his opinions. How on earth are you able to understand her? The human and the Ralts froze in their tracks, staring at him as if their brains had frozen and they were slowly rebooting themselves up. Well. He's psychically adept. The Ralts finally shouted, nervously twitching. Riolu had to suppress the urge to roll his eyes at the two of them. You two are horrible liars. But. It was around then the slow trickles of his memory returning erupted into a waterfall of information. His body involuntarily shook, paws clutched at the sides of his arms as the faint feeling of ghost pains returned. Riolu. Riolu. The human began rubbing his back gently, whispering calming words to him in an attempt to bring him back to reality. It's okay, you're safe. No one is going to hurt you, you're with us. Yeah, you're with the princess and me, his knight in shining white pajama legs. The Ralts was trying to calm him down too with the only way she really knew how, comedy. Hey, Ash. I don't want to try reading his mind, but he's broadcasting some extremely disturbing images. Do you think it would be better to get him back to sleep? What images? The boy's tone changed suddenly, all warmth lost and replaced with a sense of urgency. The others. Riolu involuntarily interrupted them, seeing everyone trapped, crying for help. The poacher still has the others. Oh Arceus, I shouldn't have left them, I should never have left them alone. A poacher? The Ralts too shifted her tone, aggressiveness rolled off of her in waves. In this area of Kanto? Why? Ash. I know, the human growled, muttering something under his breath. Riolu, please, hang in there. I'm going to call for help and, wait. As he was speaking, Riolu rushed back into the overgrowth, ignoring the shouts of his name coming from behind him. He had to go back, he had to. He ran as fast as his short legs could carry him, ignoring the lingering pain despite being healed. He was in no fit state to be running like he was, but he didn't care. There was no way he was going to stop, he had to get back, he just had to. His body did most of the work for him as he barely remembered the near flight back to the poacher's base camp. Remnants from the fight to escape began to appear on the trees and forest floor, scorch marks on trunks, the paw prints of the chasing Houndoom. It was all coming back to him, how multiple flamethrowers barely missed his body, how claws almost sliced through his skin. Riolu pushed it to the back of his mind, pushing on and on until he reached the base camp and found nothing. There was a scattering handful of evidence that someone had once resided there for a short period of time. A pile of smoldering ashes from where a campfire once stood, footprints and pawprints that followed specific patterns, the warped and twisted bars of a once secure cage, and tire tracks that sped off into the wilderness. There was nothing left, no terrified Pokémon, no smug grin leering down from the other side of the cages, nothing. Only the discarded remains of a messy and quick evacuation remained. Riolu had escaped thanks to the others, to get help, to get allies, but he had failed in his sole mission. He hadn't saved them, all the others were still in the hands of that horrible man, ready to be sold off for dirty money. Riolu didn't even realize the human and Ralts from earlier had followed him until he heard their shocked gasps from behind him as they stumbled across the scene. Riolu? The Ralts asked cautiously, being careful with her words whilst also getting directly to the point. What happened here? Why did you run so madly to this place? I couldn't. He began to cry, falling to his knees which stained his fur with the dust from the dry ground. I promised them I'd save them. I couldn't get help in time. I wasn't strong enough. I failed them. No one spoke for a while, the sheer severity of what happened devoured them of speech minus his occasional sobs. The human was reaching for some kind of communicative device, most likely calling an emergency number with his Ralts piping up to remind him to add all the details they knew. Something was nagging at the back of Riolu's mind, as if he had forgotten something extremely important. As he remained, knelt in the dirt, it suddenly clicked when a shadow began to loom over him. The poacher had an Ariados too. It was standing on its hind legs, having sneakily crept up to him whilst he was in a catatonic sense of shock. This Pokemon was the sole reason behind most of the captures under the poacher's reign, poisoning its foes and then wrapping them up to drag them back to its master. It must have been lying in wait for him, for legs glowing an acidic purple as it began to lunge down at him. Ralts, confusion. The human cried out, to which the psychic type responded immediately, blasting the part-poison type back easily. Riolu, frozen in place, couldn't believe it. No one had been able to land a hit on that Ariados before, not like the small, measly Ralts had done. The spider-like beast shook its head, clicking angrily that it had been deterred from recapturing its escaped prey, and it turned its attention to the boy. Riolu knew that all sentience and personality had been drained from the Pokemon under the poacher's command, they were just tools to him, a means to an end. It was terrifying to watch them, even more so as a spectator to a battle. The Ariados lunged again, this time with fangs in full view steeped in a murky green glow. Before Riolu could even warn them of the oncoming danger, the human and the Ralts acted accordingly. Shadow sneak. Roger that, buddy. Ralts melted into the floor, becoming naught but a barely visible purple mass that skimmed across the ground towards the confused bug type before leaping up underneath it with a punch for additional damage. The Ariados was flipped over onto its back, legs violently jabbing and wiggling in an attempt to get itself back on its feet. However, the duo of trainer and Pokemon were not willing to give it a chance to even accomplish that attempt. Use confusion and blast the Ariados into the densest thing you can. Another well-timed psychic-powered blast sent the bug flying headfirst into a sturdy tree, the hit knocking it unconscious instantly. Riolu watched in amazement as the human quickly called the police, possibly, whilst the Ralts began to cheer and congratulate herself for their win. They were strong, really strong. If he could become as strong, or stronger than they were, then he could stand a chance at finding and saving everyone. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. A Pokemon in the wild was less likely to be as strong or stronger than a trained Pokemon. It was then he had an idea. 000. Ash breathed a sigh of relief following the investigation of the small handful of police officers that arrived on the scene. Apparently, the poacher who had taken Riolu and his possible friends was highly wanted by the authorities for not only kidnapping Pokemon, but from stealing from trainers and for endangerment of human and Pokemon lives. The officer Jenny leading the investigation told him he was extremely lucky to have only ran into one of the man's Pokemon, and thanked him for giving them a lead in their case. Of course, the hard part of the entire thing was conveying how he knew this was the site of a poacher without revealing he could understand Pokemon and came up with the cover story of, "I just assumed since Riolu's behavior and the cage remains." That seemed to work, and not long after, he was sent back on his way with the officers promising to take Riolu to the nearby Pokemon Center for a checkup before returning him to his home. Despite having helped Riolu get slightly better, Ash couldn't help but feel anger at the entire situation. He just couldn't wrap his head around why someone would do such a thing, let alone put a numerical value on a Pokemon's life. Pokemon were friends and priceless, they weren't trophies and objects to sell. Called him naive, but he just couldn't see why and how someone could do such a horrible thing. Ralts must have picked this up from his demeanor and tugged at his trouser leg. Ash, cheer up, we did all that we could, she gave him a big smile, to reassure him that he did the right thing. And even if we had shown up when the poacher was still there, what could we have done? You're a starting trainer and I'm not even a Curlia yet. We did what we were capable of and it helped the police out a lot, they'll catch him, you'll see. Yeah, you're right. He sighed deeply, still regretful that he couldn't do more. It's just, well, you know. Ralts nodded, patting his leg gently. Yeah, I know. You actually have morals and a good sense of justice, so you wanted to solve everything. Just because you have the mark of the Holy One, it doesn't make you invincible and all-powerful. It's like you said to me, practice and training. We'll get there someday. I didn't know you were such a motivational speaker. Thank you, I try. Hey! Wait up! A familiar yell stopped the duo in their tracks as behind them, running to catch up, was Riolu. Whoa, 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 hold your horsia. Ralts positioned herself between the fighting type and her trainer, holding her stubby arms out to stop him from bashing into her Ash's legs. Calm down and breathe. Can you see how many fingers I'm holding up? You don't have fingers. Riolu panted whilst glaring at her as if she was insane. Well, I could have, in my mind. Riolu, what are you doing here? Ash knelt down so he was closer to the Pokémon. You should be back in Viridian City recovering. Look, we'll help you back, but you really need the rest. No. I don't want to go back. Riolu shouted, fired up temporarily by his driving motive. I want to go with you. This came easily as a shock to both the psychic type and the human, who gave each other confused stares. Why do you want to join the team? I mean, sure, having an extra mon around would be great, but... Ralts was interrupted almost instantly. I want to be stronger. You two managed to take on his Ariados like it was nothing. I want to take revenge on him, and save all the others he took. But, right now, I'm way too weak. Riolu stared at his paws, clenching them tightly as fury worked its way through his body. I thought, if you could train me, then I'd be strong enough to one day save everyone. So please, let me be your Pokémon. He bowed, closing his eyes whilst waiting to hear the "no can do, you're too weak and narrow-minded" response he had heard about before. But, it never came. Revenge is never a good motivation for being a trainer's Pokémon, Ash answered truthfully, reflecting on his own state of mind. But I get where you're coming from. Right now, I feel mad that I wasn't able to do anything more than I did, that I wouldn't be able to save anyone, even if I had tried. You want to be a trained Pokémon to be able to one day stop the continuation of a terrible business, and whilst you are following your emotional state you do have good intentions behind them. He turned to his starter, still somewhat frowning. What do you think, Ralts? Should we allow Riolu onto the team? I'm okay with it, as long as he answers one question. She turned to face the fighting type and lifted her fringe so he could stare directly into her eyes. After you've completed your goal, after you've destroyed the poacher's ring. What are you going to do then? Are you going to abandon us or will you stay? I don't have anywhere to go, and whilst being strong enough to defeat him is my main goal, isn't it any Pokémon's goal to become the strongest, to evolve and go as far as they possibly can? Riolu spoke, steadfast and determined in his resolve. All trainers aim for greatness and I want to be the best Lucario I could ever possibly be, so as staying with you two will lead me towards that path, I intend on sticking around as long as you want me to. Ralts simply grinned, and offered out her arm. Welcome to the team, Mutt. Thanks for the kind welcome, nerd. Break it up you two, Ash groaned, whilst pulling an empty poke ball out from his trouser pocket. Okay Riolu, to be a part of my team, you need to get caught in one of these. I'll let you out as soon as it's done, alright? Riolu nodded, and slapped the white button in the center, being SCKED in with a red light. The contraption shook once, twice, 3 times and then pinged, signaling a successful capture. Alright, I guess I caught Riolu. He immediately released the fighting type, who shook himself off but seemed no different from when he was seked into the ball. So, what now? Riolu asked. Well, since it's getting dark, set up camp for the night, and then tomorrow train in Viridian Forest for the Pewter City Gym. Ash yawned slightly as he spoke. It has been a long day after all, for all of us, and we all need a decent night's sleep. All we need to do now is find a clear spot to sleep and start a fire in. His two Pokemon nodded in agreement, and they continued on down the road when Ralts decided she wanted to pip up once more. I guess this is a bad time to tell the new guy you're the chosen one of Arceus. Hey Ashy boy. Wait. He's what? 000. The room was dark, only illuminated by the projection on the board, showing blueprints of laboratory. A man in a black suit and tie was pointing to it, staring down at the task force of roughly 20 that was gathered in front of him, all of them in roughly the same attire he was. So, in closing, Team A will infiltrate the building whilst Team B will create an external extraction of the data. Remember, this is a highly important mission, so failure isn't an option, understood? Without waiting for a response to those seated, the man finished his presentation. Alright, dismissed. Some of the people in the room left immediately, in a rush to get back to whatever they were doing before the meeting had been called, others remaining to talk to their comrades about the mission. One such person was Agent Looker, who most of his colleagues jokingly called a wannabe Time Lord, for the way he dressed. As soon as the presentation was over, he flagged another agent, Agent Blue, for a quick chat. Ah, Looker, Agent Blue spoke calmly, despite the fact she was fiddling with her scrunchie to a small degree. You're on Team A, right? They don't call me a master of disguise for nothing. He laughed heartily, sitting down in the vacant seat beside her. I'll be fine. It's you I'm more concerned about. Me? Blue began to splutter, fiddling with her fingers and the sleeves of her navy blue jacket. Why are you worrying about me? I'm perfectly fine. Delia, Looker gave her a serious stare, as if the usage of her actual name hadn't already made it apparent to the other agent. I know you're upset because you couldn't see him leave, aren't you? Knowing who Looker was referring to, mostly due to the fact he was a family friend, Blue sighed and nodded. Yes, I feel so awful leaving him with Samuel and never being there for him. But after everything, I'm just not strong enough. That's a lie and you know it, Looker scoffed, ignoring her frowning. You're the strongest person I know, and we're working for the International Secret Police and I know a lot of people here. But Blue, what happened to Agent Red was a travesty, we were all there, he said softly, trying to make her feel better instead of putting her in a worse mood. But we all deal with loss in completely different ways, and yours is to overwork yourself to the bone, which isn't healthy for you, might I add. Looker paused, checking his coworker just in case he was pushing too far. However, I know you love your son and would do anything for him, and it's not as if you don't ever see him. I'm sure you'll be able to run into him whilst he's out on his journey someday. Right, Agent Blue took a deep breath in, steadied herself emotionally, and gave her fellow agent a small smile. Thank you, Looker. I'll try my best to remember that. No problem, anything to help the best agent in the same division as I'm in. Looker got up to leave, only to realize he'd forgotten to mention something. Oh, and by the way, I passed your computer on the way here. You had an urgent email from Professor Oak. Just wanted to let you know, it was flashing up on your screen. Alright, thanks. Blue rushed out of the meeting room, past Looker and towards her desk, passing multiple other officers and officials as she did so. Skidding to a halt, she practically jumped into her swiveling chair and opened her emails. Just as Looker had said, an urgent email from Samuel resided at the top, with no subject matter other than R.E. urgent, which was highly unusual, for the professor's standards. She cautiously clicked it open and began reading when she finally found out what the urgency was about. Her body froze, blood turning to ice. Head spinning, pupils dilating, she was terrified at what was there in black text on her screen. Following a long bout of blinking, she rubbed fiercely at her eyes to make sure what she was reading was not an illusion. It was not. It wasn't for a while until Looker came in to check on her that the full extent of the effect that the email had on her. Blue was sobbing harshly, curled in on herself whilst muttering, "Not him. And, not my baby boy," blabbering on and on about how such a tragic fate was her fault. The computer screen had turned itself off to conserve power, so he had no idea what was so terrifying that it had brought one of the ISP's best agents to an emotional breakdown. He tried his best to help, bringing her herbal tea and being there as a calming voice and a shoulder to cry on until she had managed to pull herself together. "Are you, all right?" Looker inquired gently, wincing at the fractured breathing of the other agent. "Not really, but I think I'm getting there." Her expression changed instantly from tear-stricken and broken to cold and deadly, terrifying the globe-trotting man. "Agent Looker, can you please give me an hour or so? I need to make an important phone call." Of course, he instantly agreed, knowing how dangerous it was to mess with her when she had that dark look over her face. "If you need me, I'll be down the hallway." With that, he left her cubicle, leaving her alone once more. Agent Blue stayed motionless for a moment, plotting the best way to address this issue to the aging professor. She was about to express her discontent, for a lack of a better word, at the situation. Once she had figured out the easiest method to start the conversation, she picked up the phone on her desk and dialed Samuel's number. She didn't have to wait long before a cheery greeting met her ears, one that would not be cheery for long. "Hello, Samuel. It's me, Delia." With that, the atmosphere of the call became near freezing as the man on the opposite line was hit with the scenario he was now in. "I'd like to chat with you about the email you sent me, about my son. I hope it's not too much of a bother. I'll take up as little of your time as possible." It was true what people say, never drop bombshells involving a mother ursaring's cub on the said mother, or you might not live to tell the tale.